The dawn is pale and sour on June 9th, 68 AD, filtering through the mist like light that has forgotten how to shine. Outside a crumbling villa just a few miles from Rome, the world holds its breath. And inside, in a dim, cold cellar that still smells of mold and old bread, the most powerful man on earth is dying. Not with dignity, nor in silence, but weeping, trembling, choking on his own fear. He clutches at the folds of his cloak, not for warmth, but to muffle the whimpers escaping his throat. His lips, once curled in smug performances before roaring crowds, now mumble a broken refrain. Qualis artifex pereo. What an artist dies in me. But this man, this Nero, is no artist. Not truly. Not in the way he wanted to be remembered. He was emperor, god, beast, lover, liar, murderer. A man who demanded the world kneel before his voice, and when it didn't, he burned the world to make it listen. He saw beauty in fire, poetry in agony, applause in the cries of burning flesh. His reign began with a mother's ambition and ends with the screams of ghosts he cannot silence. Agrippina, Britannicus, Octavia, Poppaea, Sporus. Names he turned into ashes and blood, and yet they remain, echoing through his skull as the horsemen draw near. He once composed ballads as Rome burned. Now his song ends with no audience but a castrated boy dressed as a bride and the sound of soldiers breaking through the front door. This is no longer a story of Rome. This is the final scene of a man who mistook cruelty for art and applause for love. And as he holds the dagger in his trembling hand, unable to pierce his own flesh, what dies in him is not an artist. What dies is a monster who dared to call himself beautiful. Part 1: The Poisoned Womb. Before Nero could scream, before he could kill, before he could sing to the flames of a dying city, he was just a child born of something older, darker, more ancient than cruelty itself, ambition, soaked in imperial blood. December 15th, 37 AD, Antium. A small town by the sea, where the waves carry whispers of distant gods and older sins. As the sun breaks over the water, a woman gives birth. Her name is Agrippina the Younger, sister to the Emperor Caligula, great-granddaughter of Augustus, and a storm disguised as flesh. The child she delivers, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, does not cry like other infants. He does not wail. He opens his eyes and stares. As if he already knows the world will kneel. The omens are impossible to ignore. A comet seen above the bay, a statue struck by lightning, a priest dies mid-prayer. The Romans whisper, "This boy will burn the empire to the ground." His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, is a man so vile that when friends congratulate him on the birth, he replies, "From me and Agrippina, nothing monstrous could fail to be born." He is not joking. He is not wrong. The boy's bloodline reads like a butcher's ledger. His ancestors rode elephants through Gaul, displaying the severed heads of enemies like festival lanterns. His grandfather gouged out a knight's eye in the forum for speaking out of turn. His great-uncle Caligula proclaimed himself a living god and made his horse a senator. And his mother, Agrippina, was exiled for plotting against her own brother, then returned to Rome like a tide of poison. By the time Lucius is 3, his father is dead. Some say dropsy, others poison, and the family fortune has been seized by Caligula himself. His mother is banished once more, and the child is left in the care of strangers. Not statesmen or scholars, but a dancer and a barber. That is how emperors are made now, in shadows, not schools. And yet the child survives, because Agrippina does not forget. When Caligula is assassinated, stabbed 30 times by his own guards, she returns from exile like a blade redrawn. Her eyes are colder now, her ambitions sharper. She seduces a rich nobleman, marries him, inherits everything, and moves on. Then her gaze settles on the throne, not for herself, but for her son. The emperor now is Claudius, a stuttering, drooling relic, more scholar than Caesar. But what he lacks in spine, Agrippina makes up for in venom. She flatters him, enchants him, and when his current wife, Messalina, commits the ultimate sin, marrying another man while Claudius still lives, Agrippina strikes. Messalina is executed. Agrippina steps over her corpse and into the palace. Roman law forbids an uncle from marrying his niece, but Claudius is emperor and laws are for others. In 49 AD, Lucius watches his mother become empress. She wastes no time. Claudius is convinced to adopt the boy. A new name is bestowed upon him like a crown of thorns. Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. He is 13. At 14, he is named heir over Claudius's own son, Britannicus. At 15, he marries Octavia, Claudius's daughter. Brother, husband, heir, spider. All the pieces are in place. And then, on a quiet night in October of 54 AD, Claudius eats his favorite dish, mushrooms. He never finishes the meal. Agrippina ensures the first dose is slow. The second, administered by a professional poisoner disguised as a nurse, is swift. A feather dipped in death, shoved down his throat. Claudius dies retching on his own tongue, and the boy becomes emperor. Nero is 17, the most powerful man on earth. And behind the curtain, just out of frame, his mother smiles. But what she does not yet understand is that she has not raised a son. She has awakened a monster, one with the face of a golden youth and the hunger of something that remembers the smell of blood before it knew the meaning of love. Part 2, Prince of Steel, Singer of Death. At 17, he wore the purple like it was spun from sunlight. The Roman people looked upon him and saw a god reborn, tall, golden-haired, with the soft features of a marble statue brought to life. They cheered, they whispered, "Perhaps Augustus walks among us again." They did not see the blade beneath the robe. In those first months, Nero played his part well. He was merciful, gracious. When asked to sign a death warrant, he reportedly said, "Oh, how I wish I did not know how to write." The Senate sighed in relief. The Praetorian Guard relaxed their grip on their blades. Rome, exhausted from the storms of Caligula and Claudius, allowed itself to hope. But behind the public charm stood three shadows: Agrippina, the ever-watchful mother; Seneca, the stoic philosopher-tutor; and Burrus, head of the Praetorian Guard. Together, they formed a wall between Nero and the abyss. Together, they tried to hold the monster back. And for a time, it worked. They called it the Quinquennium Neronis. 5 years of good government. Taxes were lowered. Public games were lavish. Grain was cheap. The empire breathed. But peace bored Nero. He did not want to be a ruler. He wanted to be adored. He wanted the world to not merely obey, but to weep at his beauty, to collapse in ecstasy at the sound of his voice, to call him artist, god, immortal. And the first step to that fantasy was murder. His first target was close, too close. Britannicus, the true son of Claudius, younger than Nero, quieter, gentler. No threat by sword or politics, but a threat by blood. Nero could not bear to share the spotlight. Even a silent rival casts a shadow. So he planned the boy's death with the same precision he might craft a tragic aria. One evening, at a royal banquet, Britannicus asked for his wine cooled with water, a common request. The water had been prepared, not by servants, but by Locusta, Rome's most infamous poisoner, a woman whose tinctures could kill slowly, or in seconds. The boy drank. Within moments, his limbs jerked violently, his face twisted, lips foaming, eyes rolling backward. He collapsed to the floor in convulsions before the horrified stares of Rome's elite. Nero did not flinch. He sipped his own wine and calmly said, "Do not be alarmed. He suffers from the falling sickness." No physicians were called, no prayers were offered. Britannicus died twitching at Nero's feet, and the feast continued. That night, Rome saw its future, and it bled. From that moment on, Nero's mask began to slip. He resented the leash his mother kept tight around his throat. Agrippina insisted on sitting beside him in public ceremonies, demanded her image be placed on coins beside his own, and spoke of ruling together as equals, or worse, as master and son puppet. He seethed, and then he saw her replacement. Poppaea Sabina, a woman of lethal softness, beautiful, cunning, and cruel in all the right places. She whispered into Nero's ear, not as a mother would, but as a lover, a serpent, a muse. "You are not an emperor if your mother still rules you." Agrippina sensed the shift. She tried to claw her way back into control. She even hinted that perhaps Britannicus should have been emperor after all. Nero heard, and he decided. The woman who had birthed him, poisoned for him, crowned him, would now die for him. But it had to look like an accident. She was still beloved by the people, respected by the legions. A public execution would raise rebellion. A quiet death. Now that was theater. So he gave her a gift, a boat, a marvel of design, lavish, grand, deadly. It was built so that the roof could collapse mid-voyage, crushing her beneath its golden beams. That night, under the stars of Baiae, Agrippina boarded with her attendants. The wine flowed. The sea was calm. At the planned moment, the roof came down. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. It missed. Her friend was killed. Agrippina, ever the survivor, hurled herself into the sea. The crew panicked. They tried to finish her off with poles and oars, but she swam. Through darkness, through blood, through betrayal, she made it to shore, wounded but alive. And she knew her son had tried to kill her. Nero panicked. No more games, no more artifice. He sent assassins to her villa. They found her writing letters, soaked in seawater and fury. She stood tall. She did not beg. She bared her chest and said, "Strike here, strike the womb that bore such a monster." The blades obeyed, and Rome's most dangerous woman bled out in silence. Back in the palace, Nero paced. He wept. He sang, he raved, not from grief, but from fear. He had crossed a line, not just political, but sacred. The Romans could forgive a tyrant, but a matricide? That haunted the soul of the Republic. From here, Nero would never return. He would try to fill the void with music, with fire, with pleasure. But the boy born in ambition was gone. What remained was the artist of agony, the poet of death, the emperor of ruin. Part 3, Rome burns, and he sings it. Begins with a spark. No one knows the exact cause. A tipped oil lamp, a stove left unwatched, a careless breath of summer wind. But in the wooden stalls near the Circus Maximus, where Rome stores its grain, its dreams, and its dry kindling, the fire begins. July 18th, 64 AD. Within hours, it becomes a living thing. The flames devour everything they touch. Wood, flesh, memory, stone. They leap across rooftops like dancers, chase children through alleyways, boil fountains dry. Rome, the eternal city, the mistress of the world, becomes a funeral pyre for her own glory. For 6 days and 7 nights, the fire rages. It does not sleep. It does not tire. It feeds. And Nero? He watches. Some say he was in Antium when the fire began, far from the smoke. Others claim he stood atop the Maecenas Tower, clad in stage robes, strumming his lyre as the city turned to ash. The truth is blurred, like everything else with Nero. But the image lingers. The emperor, crowned in laurel, silhouetted by flames, performing an ode to the fall of Troy while his people scream beneath him. He sings not for them, but for himself, for history, for immortality. In his mind, he is not the arsonist. He is the artist. By the time the fire is done, 2/3 of the city are gone. Temples, homes, archives, the great libraries, all reduced to soot. Refugees huddle in gardens, sobbing. Corpses line the Tiber like driftwood. Mothers claw through rubble for bones they hope still belong to children. And then, amidst the smoke, construction begins. Faster than mourning, faster than recovery. Nero arrives with architects, unrolling blueprints where families have just finished burying their dead. He walks among the ruins, not with sorrow, but with hunger. He will build something new, something eternal, something worthy of him. He calls it the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. Imagine it, a palace that stretches across 1/3 of Rome, walls inlaid with ivory and gemstones, ceilings that rotate like the stars, artificial lakes, golden halls. A colossal statue of Nero himself, 120 feet tall, its gaze locked on the sun, as if daring Apollo to look away. A god's monument built on the graves of the city. And the people whisper. They remember how quickly the fire spread, how conveniently the slums burned, clearing land that had once been impossible to seize. How conveniently Nero's dreamscape fits the map of their dead neighborhoods. They speak softly at first, then louder, then in the streets. Nero set the fire. Nero burned the city. Nero watched us burn. And Nero hears. He needs a scapegoat. Something strange, something hated, something expendable. He finds them in the shadows. A small sect from Judea. Believers in a crucified God. Preachers of the end of days. Strange in dress, stranger in speech. Unpatriotic, unafraid. The Christians. The arrests begin. Men, women, children, entire families. They are tortured until confessions spill like blood on stone. But Nero is not satisfied with confession. He wants theater. He wants spectacle. In his private gardens, the Christians are sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others are nailed to crosses, covered in pitch, and lit on fire to serve as torches for Nero's evening strolls. He walks among them with guests, drinking wine as their bodies crackle. He calls them lanterns. He recites poetry to the sound of burning flesh. He laughs as his guests vomit behind hedges. This is not execution, this is art. But something shifts. The people do not recoil from the Christians. They recoil from him. His cruelty has passed the threshold of entertainment. It has become unbearable. The whispers return. But now they are not about fires or faith. Now they are about madness. They ask if the emperor is still human. And Nero? He plays harder. He begins to see himself not just as ruler, but as performer incarnate. His greatest ambition now is not victory, but applause. He will give them a performance the world will never forget. He will rewrite the myth of Orpheus, not in song, but in blood. He does not realize the curtain is already rising. On the final act. Part 4, The Wedding of the Dead. Sporus, blood bride. After Rome burned, something in Nero split. Not broke. Split. Like skin stretched too tight, finally tearing open, not with pain, but with release. He had murdered his mother, poisoned his brother, tortured the city, burned the heavens above its roof, and still it wasn't enough, because Poppaea was gone, and she had taken with her the last tether to whatever version of himself he believed in. She had been his mirror, his conspirator, the only one who knew how to feed the monster and still call it love. When she died, screaming, blood spilling between her legs from a kick he delivered to her pregnant stomach, Nero lost not a wife, but a muse. He tried to bury the pain in music, in races, in orgies that lasted from dusk till ash-grey dawn. But nothing sang like she sang, no skin felt like hers, no voice could whisper cruelty with the same delicate grace. Then he saw the boy, a face, a silhouette, a memory with breath. Sporus, barely 14, a slave, quiet, pale, fragile in the way Poppaea had been fragile, like something glass-thin, shaped for worship. And in Nero's rotting mind, the solution became divine. If Poppaea was lost, he would recreate her. He would remake her in flesh. He would force the world to witness his grief as art. Sporus was summoned. He did not know why. He knelt. Nero smiled. No words of comfort, no offer of freedom, no illusion. Just a decree. You will become her. The operation followed. Castration. Not with anesthesia, not with mercy, but with Nero watching, ensuring the boy's screams matched the memories in his head. They held Sporus down, a red-hot knife, the stink of scorched skin and blood. His manhood gone forever, because the emperor needed a ghost to marry. Recovery was slow, not because they cared, but because Nero wanted perfection. Sporus was dressed in silk, taught to walk with poise, to bow, to curtsy, to smile on cue. Cosmetics were applied daily to match Poppaea's style. Lip shape, eyebrow curve, perfume. A dowry was arranged. Invitations sent. The empire's elite gathered in silence, horrified but voiceless. And then it happened. A wedding. The emperor in golden robes, the boy in bridal white, veiled, powdered, trembling beneath layers of makeup and mandate. The crowd said nothing, because the bridegroom held the power of life and death, and the bride held nothing. From that day on, Sporus was empress. He sat beside Nero in public. He was paraded through Rome in a litter carved for queens. When addressed, it had to be with feminine pronouns. When touched, it had to be gentle, ceremonial, as one would handle holy relics or living corpses. But in private, there was no ritual, only violation. Nero used the boy like a vessel. He reenacted scenes from memory. He whispered Poppaea's name as he ravaged Sporus's mutilated body. To love for Nero was to consume, to possess, to destroy, and the world watched. Senators faked smiles. Nobles offered gifts. Coins were minted with veiled references to Nero's divine marriage. And anyone who dared speak truth of the horror of the madness disappeared, quietly, quickly. What was Sporus to Rome? A symbol? A tragedy? A warning? Or simply nothing? Because in an empire ruled by a god, Even a mutilated boy in a bridal gown must smile. But this grotesque union did not bring Nero peace. It fed him, briefly, and then the hunger returned. He no longer desired music, he wanted sound, screams, cheering, begging. He no longer sought beauty, only reaction. Horror was applause. He made nobles fight as gladiators. He forced scholars to act in tragedies he wrote the night before. He executed men of noble blood, not for treason, but for lineage, because they reminded him he was still mortal. And at night he wandered, not in silence, but in disguise. Cloaked, masked, surrounded by other drunk aristocrats, they roamed the streets of Rome, beating merchants, raping strangers, murdering for sport. If any citizen fought back, they were charged with attacking the emperor, often crucified within days. Nero the singer, Nero the lover, Nero the beast beneath the robe. And Sporus? Sporus endured. He sat at Nero's side. He watched each new cruelty with deadened eyes. A boy trapped in a corpse, a ghost trapped in a performance, a bride waiting for a funeral. Part 5, The Blood Banquet, Rome Fractures. By 65 AD, Nero had outlived his ghosts. Agrippina, Britannicus, Octavia, Poppaea, Seneca, Burrus, all gone. He was finally alone, supreme, unquestioned, and rotting from the inside. The empire was his stage, and every day was a new scene in a tragedy that only he found beautiful. He had become unhinged, not just cruel, not just theatrical. Mad, he no longer governed. He curated. He did not meet with senators, he auditioned them. He did not punish traitors. He rewrote them, killing them in ways that matched their perceived sins, turning their deaths into theater. A senator who spoke too freely was gagged and buried alive. A general who dared question his command was bound, flayed, and posed like a statue. Poets who mocked him had their tongues nailed to the forum steps, left to writhe until silence came. Blood was paint, screams were music, and Nero, the composer of cruelty, was always listening for a new note. His palace, the Domus Aurea, now complete, gleamed like a dream carved from blasphemy. Gold everywhere. Rotating banquet halls, ceilings that rained down perfume, a lake where entire ships reenacted mythological sea battles, while real slaves drowned for realism. Each night, Nero hosted orgies disguised as banquets, not dinners, but rituals. Women, men, children, senators' wives offered as tribute, governors' sons, stripped of rank and honor, forced to dance like whores. At the center of it all, Nero, crowned in flowers, eyes rimmed in kohl, clapping in rhythm, while Sporus, still dressed in bridal silk, poured wine over his lap. But power built on spectacle is always hungry, and outside the palace walls, the empire began to groan. The grain shipments slowed, the army grew restless, taxes rose, coins were debased with lead, the treasury was nearly dry. Why? Because Nero had spent it all, on performances, palaces, prizes, and pretense. Even his tour to Greece in 66 AD, which he called his artistic triumph, had nearly bankrupted Rome. For a year, he traveled city to city, performing in every major festival, singing, acting, racing chariots. He won every competition. Of course he did. Even when he fell from his chariot and had to be carried off the track unconscious, he was still declared the victor. The judges feared the truth more than the gods. When Nero returned to Rome, he expected ovation. Instead, he met silence, then murmurs, then absences, then letters, from generals, from governors, polite, subtle, dangerous. Gaul, Spain, Africa. Whispers, Rome has no emperor. Rome needs new blood. Nero is not a god, he is a disease. And worse, the Praetorian Guard began to shift, slowly, quietly. Those sworn to protect him started wondering what side history would write them on. Then came the final insult. Gaius Julius Vindex in Gaul raised the first banner of open revolt. Nero laughed. He called him a clown, a failed poet, a provincial nobody. But Vindex was only the first crack. Galba followed in Spain, and Galba had something Vindex did not: an army. Back in Rome, Nero clung to delusion. He designed costumes for his triumphal return. He commissioned songs about his future victories, ballads that would be sung after his enemies were crucified. He even rehearsed lines for the Senate chambers, monologues of forgiveness, of divine wrath, of final redemption. He saw himself not as cornered, but as misunderstood, a prophet whose genius had outpaced the dullness of the world. But the world had stopped clapping. When news arrived that the Senate was meeting without him, when letters went unanswered, when the Praetorian Guard locked the palace gates behind his back, he felt it, not the pain of betrayal, but the cold truth of irrelevance. He had killed gods, burned cities, rewritten grief into grotesque theater. But now, nobody cared. Sporus found him wandering the halls of the Domus Aurea one night, barefoot, muttering to himself, draped in a torn rehearsal robe. "They don't see me," he whispered. "I gave them Rome. I gave them song, and they give me silence." The next morning, the Senate declared him a public enemy. The punishment? Death by flogging, a sentence reserved for the lowest of criminals. Nero, the man who crowned himself divine, who married a boy and named him empress, who made Rome his stage and fire his brush, was now to be whipped naked through the streets like a slave. The guards abandoned him. The servants looted his closets. Even the musicians refused to follow. And so, with only 4 companions, Sporus among them, he fled Rome like a dog. A fallen Caesar, a castrated boy in bridal veil, a freedman, a secretary, a valet. They ran through olive groves under moonlight, cloaked in panic. And the last emperor of the Julio-Claudians whispered into the wind again and again, "What an artist dies in me." Part 6. The Last Tear of Blood, Death of the Monster. The villa stood quiet on the outskirts of Rome. A freedman's home, modest, unremarkable, built for rest, not refuge. And yet it was here, in a cramped storage cellar with a dirt floor and mildew-stained walls, that the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian line would crawl on hands and knees, dragging behind him the tattered remnants of a crown no longer recognized by gods or men. His name was Nero, but even he no longer spoke it. He had once dined beneath ceilings that rained rose petals and pearls. Now he huddled in rags beside a broken oil lamp, breathing in dust and fear. Only 4 remained with him. Phaon, the freedman who dared offer shelter. Epaphroditus, the secretary loyal not to Nero, but to history. Neophytus, the valet too frightened to flee. And Sporus, still dressed in bridal white, face smeared with the same rouge that had once pleased an emperor. There were no guards, no senators, no gods left to worship him. Only the sound of hooves in the distance. Getting closer. Word had arrived like cold steel to the gut. The Senate had condemned him, not just to death, but to shame. He would be stripped, flogged in public, his body mutilated and thrown into the Tiber like carrion. No tomb, no epitaph, no legacy. Just erasure. The end of Nero would not be a tragedy. It would be a purge. And so he wept. Not for his crimes, not for the empire, but for his possessions. "They've stolen my lyres," he sobbed, "my costumes, my golden sandals." The man who set cities ablaze for inspiration now trembled because his wardrobe was gone. The monster at the end was just a child, stripped of illusion, stripped of power, clinging to things. Epaphroditus stepped forward, voice calm but cold. "Caesar, if you must die, do so with dignity. Choose your end, or they will choose it for you." Nero shook his head. "I can't. My hands, these hands are for music, not violence. I never hurt anyone myself." But he had. Oh, he had. Not with blades, with orders, with silence, with song. He held the dagger like it might bite, tried to press it to his throat. His hand shook. Tears streaked the paint on his cheeks. "I'm not ready. Not like this. I'm Caesar." Outside, the voices grew louder. Armor clinked, hooves stomped. Death was coming, not noble, not swift. It would be a spectacle, a punishment worthy of the horror he had birthed. "You must begin it," whispered Epaphroditus, "or I will end it for you." And so, in the last seconds of his life, Nero, the man who demanded ovations as others died, gave himself his first and only real wound. The dagger pierced his throat, poorly angled, blood spilled, but not enough. He gagged, choked, flailed. Sporus screamed. Epaphroditus leaned in, whispered a prayer, or perhaps a curse, and then pushed the blade deeper. A second thrust. This one found the artery. The scream stopped. Only gurgling remained. As Nero bled onto the dirt, vision fading, he tried to speak. No one heard. But they say his final words, gasped through blood and failure, were these: "Qualis artifex pereo." What an artist dies in me. The door splintered moments later. The soldiers entered. They found a corpse twitching in its own blood. a castrated boy sobbing in silence, and history watching. Rome did not mourn. The city celebrated. Citizens danced, sang, spat on statues, painted walls with curses, draped flowers over the effigies of Nero's victims. Across the empire, from Britain to Egypt, the news spread like sunlight breaking after storm. The tyrant was dead, but Rome did not just bury a man that day. It buried the last descendant of Augustus. The Julio-Claudian line ended not in triumph, not in divine fire, but in a sewer of shame, in a basement, with a boy in a dress cradling a monster who had called himself a god. And yet, the lesson remained, carved not in marble, but in memory. That absolute power does not shape gods. It reveals monsters, and sometimes the greatest performances end not in applause, but in silence.